Loneliness and the feeling of being unwanted is the most terrible poverty. Loneliness is the universal problem of rich people. Loneliness is the poverty of self. Solitude is the richness of self. Loneliness expresses the pain of being alone, and solitude expresses the glory of being alone. Pray that your loneliness may spur you into finding something to live for, great enough to die for. Loneliness adds beauty to life. It puts a special burn on sunsets and makes night air smell better. Music was my refuge. I could crawl into the space between the notes and curl my back to loneliness. Loneliness is the human condition. The way it tunnels into you allows your soul room to grow. Loneliness is never more cruel than when it is felt in close propinquity with someone who has ceased to communicate. Loneliness is failed solitude. Loneliness feels like prison. Loneliness cannot be shared. Loneliness comes with life. Loneliness remembers what happiness forgets. Loneliness is the ultimate poverty. Loneliness is the ultimate poverty. Loneliness is a terrible blindness. Loneliness is a strange gift. Solitude is pleasant, loneliness is not. Loneliness is random, solitude is ritual. Loneliness is necessary for pure poetry. Loneliness is one thing, solitude another. Loneliness is a long, unbearable pain. Loneliness is the teacher of giving. Loneliness is emptiness, but happiness is you. Loneliness is a failure to appreciate others. Loneliness is a required course for leadership. Loneliness is a mirror and recognizes itself. Loneliness is more painful than being hurt. Loneliness is a darkness of the soul. Loneliness is an aspect of the land. Loneliness is a hell of a drug. Loneliness becomes a lover, solitude a darling sin. Loneliness is inner emptiness, solitude is inner fulfillment. Loneliness is lessened when you're lonely by choice. Loneliness and hunger were my fortunes of creation. Loneliness surrounds me without your arms around me. Loneliness is something you can't walk away from. Loneliness has been following me my whole life. Loneliness is everything it's cracked up to be. Loneliness is the leprosy of the modern world. Loneliness is about the scariest thing out there. Loneliness is the most compelling force in the universe. The opposite of loneliness is not togetherness, it's intimacy. Loneliness is equal to the radius of one's awareness. Loneliness becomes an acid that eats away at you. Loneliness will sit over our roofs with brooding wings. Loneliness, there is no organ that can take it all. Loneliness and darkness have just robbed me of my valuables. Loneliness is not a fault but a condition of existence. Loneliness doesn't have much to do with where you are. Loneliness is bred of a mind that has grown earthbound. Loneliness is not being alone, it's loving others to no avail. Loneliness is proof that your innate search for connection is intact. Loneliness is the poverty of self, solitude is richness of self. Loneliness can be conquered only by those who can bear solitude. Loneliness is not lack of company, loneliness is lack of purpose. Loneliness is not the absence of affection, but the absence of direction. Loneliness is a very special place. Silently, silently, you touch my face. Loneliness is the worst of all tortures, the worst of all sufferings. Loneliness can make you feel that you have a kingdom in darkness. Loneliness opens the door for wisdom, and wisdom opens all the doors. Loneliness is the way by which destiny endeavors to lead man to himself. Loneliness is a barrier that prevents one from uniting with the inner self. Loneliness is and always has been the central and inevitable experience of every man. Loneliness, tenderness, high society, notoriety. You fight for the throne and you travel alone. Loneliness is black coffee and late-night television. Solitude is herb tea and soft music. Loneliness is not cured by human company. Loneliness is cured by contact with reality. Spells of acute loneliness are an essential part of travel. Loneliness makes things happen. Loneliness, insomnia, and change. The fear of these is even worse than the reality. Loneliness is the theme, and I play it like a symphony in endless variations. If you don't understand the color of darkness and loneliness, then you must be blind. Loneliness is, I think, people's biggest fear, whether they are conscious of it or not. Loneliness and the feeling that you're no use to anyone, the worst kind of poverty. Loneliness got a mind of its own. The more people around, the more you feel alone. People who can't be alone have a problem. Loneliness is a luxury for people like me. Loneliness is more likely to lead to fussy housekeeping than to grand views of the universe. So the richest are often the poorest, as this saying goes. Loneliness is the ultimate poverty. Loneliness is like starvation. You don't realize how hungry you are until you begin to eat. Loneliness is caused by an alienation from life. It is a loneliness from your real self. Loneliness, when accepted, becomes a gift that will lead us to find a purpose in life. Loneliness in a crowd of people was the worst kind of loneliness, but she couldn't help it. Loneliness is only an opportunity to cut adrift and find yourself. Loneliness in travel directs you and tells you about yourself. You don't become lonely unless you're alone. Loneliness as a situation can be corrected, but as a state of mind, it is an incurable illness. Loneliness does not worry me. Life is difficult enough, putting up with yourself and with your own habits. Loneliness is like being the only person left alive in the universe, except that everyone else is still here. Loneliness was tough, the toughest role you ever played. Hollywood created a superstar, and pain was the price you paid. Because, once alone, it is impossible to believe that one could ever have been otherwise. Loneliness is an absolute discovery. Loneliness is the prison of the human spirit. When we are lonely, we pace back and forth in small, shut-in worlds. Loneliness is dangerous because if aloneness does not lead to God, it leads to the devil. It leads to the cell. If loneliness is a prerequisite for freedom, freedom depends on the ability to reflect, and reflection can only begin when one is alone. Depression on my left, loneliness on my right. They don't need to show me their badges. I know these guys very well. Loneliness is a good education. You learn the things no crowds can teach, and you discover the things no crowds can give. To break the silence, the old man said the first thing that came to his mind. Loneliness is a type of violence. Loneliness is just a thing that I'm not personally interested in. So far, it hasn't been on my docket of things to write about. When I decided to be a singer, my mother warned me I'd be alone a lot. Basically, we all are. Loneliness comes with life. Loneliness had taught Harriet that there was always someone who understood. It was just so often that they were dead, and in a book. Loneliness is the price we have to pay for being born in this modern age, so full of freedom, independence, and our own egotistical selves. What loneliness is more lonely than distrust? Music was invented to confirm human loneliness. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness. To live alone is the fate of all great souls. All men's misfortunes spring from their hatred of being alone. I never found a companion that was so companionable as solitude. The concept of loneliness and exile and self-sufficiency continually bucks me up. You cannot be lonely if you like the person you're alone with. The lonely one offers his hand too quickly to whomever he encounters. We are all so much together, but we are all dying of loneliness. Life is full of misery, loneliness, and suffering, and it's all over much too soon. I think I'd like to be able to heal people's pain, whether it is hunger, loneliness, or whatever. Remember, the time you feel lonely is the time you most need to be by yourself. Life's cruelest irony. Yoga is a way to freedom. By its constant practice, we can free ourselves from fear, anguish, and loneliness. Too much self-centered attitude, brings isolation. Result, loneliness, fear, anger. The extreme self-centered attitude is the source of suffering. The end comes when we no longer talk with ourselves. It is the end of genuine thinking and the beginning of the final loneliness. I felt a haunting loneliness sometimes, and felt it in others, young clerks in the dusk, wasting the most poignant moments of night and life. What makes loneliness and anguish is not that I have no one to share my burden, but this, I have only my own burden to bear. Negative emotions like loneliness, envy, and guilt have an important role to play in a happy life. They're big, flashing signs that something needs to change. We're born alone, we live alone, we die alone. Only through our love and friendship can we create the illusion for the moment that we're not alone. Words are loneliness. Curiosity makes loneliness. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Fame doesn't end loneliness. Hate engenders loneliness and despair. Self-hatred is worse than loneliness. Children are no antidote to loneliness. Sometimes loneliness makes the loudest noise. Technology grows, and so does loneliness. Writing is an antidote for loneliness. Rituals are comforting. Rituals combat loneliness. This loneliness won't leave me alone. Hollywood is loneliness beside the swimming pool. Online communities are an expression of loneliness. Love and loneliness, they are both coincidences. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness. Ursula craved solitude, but she hated loneliness. Plato calls complacency the companion of loneliness. The worst thing baldness causes is loneliness. Novelty is a new kind of loneliness. The surest sign of age is loneliness. Loneliness is not a function of solitude. I've come home in love with loneliness. People living alone get used to loneliness. Tranquility, allied to loneliness, possessed no charms. They are sharing a drink called loneliness. Death is loneliness in its purest form. The sound of loneliness makes me happier. The surest cure for vanity is loneliness. The loneliness is the mother of wisdom. My loneliness ain't killing me no more. Each way means loneliness and communion. The liar leads an existence of unutterable loneliness. The dominant feeling of the battlefield is loneliness. The dominant feeling of the battlefield is loneliness. Oh, loneliness and cheeseburgers are a dangerous mix. My inspiration are the woman, friendship, and loneliness. Almost without exception, alcoholics are tortured by loneliness. Just the absence of loneliness, that's love enough. When does the loneliness of old age begin? If you fear loneliness, then don't get married. Thirsty for attention is a cry of loneliness. You are the architect of your own loneliness. The point of books is to combat loneliness. One should have the courage of one's loneliness. Many fears are born of fatigue and loneliness. The purpose of fiction is to combat loneliness. There is a terrible loneliness in the spring. Solitude is one thing and loneliness is another. Man's loneliness is but his fear of life. Works of art are of an infinite loneliness. Jamie enjoyed solitude, but loneliness was a constant ache. My despair is less despair than boredom and loneliness. I think cruelty is just loneliness disguised as bitterness. I diagnosed my loneliness as premature empty nest syndrome. Nothing makes us more vulnerable than loneliness except greed. Everything you do makes my body scream with loneliness. Our loneliness makes us avid column readers these days. Love plans for tomorrow and loneliness thinks of yesterday. The eagle has no liberty, he only has loneliness. It is necessary to like loneliness to be photographer. If you are afraid of loneliness, do not marry. If you are afraid of loneliness, don't get married. No one ever discovers the depths of his own loneliness. In utter loneliness, a writer tries to explain the inexplicable. To comfort any mortal against loneliness, one other is enough. I have always photographed loneliness because that is my life. A profound, unmitigated loneliness is the only truth of life. Being human is the most terrible loneliness in the universe. The worst loneliness is not to be comfortable with yourself. If loneliness is the disease, the story is the cure. One cat in a house is a sign of loneliness. Since I love you, my loneliness begins to throw you. That desert of loneliness and recrimination that men call love. I would have to say loneliness is next to uncleanliness. A world without pain, loss, betrayal, hate, death, loneliness, impossible. Over time, loneliness gets inside you and doesn't go away. It takes loneliness in oneself to recognize it in another. Alienation and loneliness plant the seeds for rebellion and consciousness. Isolation and loneliness are central causes of depression and despair. There is no loneliness like that of a failed marriage. I believe a lot of disease comes from anxiety, loneliness. The most evident quality of human life is its loneliness. Was the earth put here just to nourish human loneliness? Define loneliness. Yes, it's what we can't do for each other. Gatherings and, simultaneously, loneliness are the conditions of a writer's life. When you're not feeling holy, your loneliness says that you've sinned. The devil ache of loneliness seldom deserts the bones of the angry. Real loneliness is not necessarily limited to when you are alone. Privacy and loneliness were the traditional luxuries accorded to a skipper. Sometimes I dread loneliness more than bores, other times the reverse. These are frightening times ... when she feels herself anointed by loneliness. The way I need you is a loneliness I cannot bear. Skillful listening is the best remedy for loneliness, loquaciousness, and laryngitis. You left, and my heart is a ceaseless sermon of loneliness. I have a life that's just been a well of loneliness. The loneliness of a one-night stand is hard to take. At any moment, solitude may put on the face of loneliness. I need the pain of loneliness to make my imagination work. Of all the diseases I have known, loneliness is the worst. Stretch a hand to one unfriended and thy loneliness is ended. There is no loneliness like the loneliness of a dead marriage. I have a very childlike rage and a very childlike loneliness. When we are most alone is when we embrace another's loneliness. Solitude well practiced will break the power of busyness, haste, isolation, and loneliness. Many Christians suffer from loneliness because they are sitting instead of serving. Oh, whoever has been himself alone can never find another's loneliness strange. I knew this feeling, the 2 a.m. loneliness that I'd practically invented. Time brought along its secretary, memory, and space brought its brat, loneliness. Usually there's no specific reason for loneliness. It's a broad feeling. Lonely, give it to Jesus. The loneliness itself is material for sacrifice. Being a good host offsets the deprivation and loneliness of my youth. Love was the result of having caught a glimpse of another's loneliness. Birth is the start of loneliness, and loneliness the start of poetry. After all, who doesn't wish to make a spectacle of their loneliness? Loneliness gives you opportunity to look the beauty of out of window. I think the most common cause of insomnia is simple, it's loneliness. The fear inside of loneliness, that only what others have is real. Acting is the greatest answer to my loneliness that I have found. Reading, the best state yet to keep absolute loneliness at bay. Being a good host offsets the deprivation and loneliness of my youth. Python carries his loneliness in him as if he had eaten clay. Poverty only tries men's souls. It is loneliness that breaks the heart. The interesting thing is why we're so desperate for this anesthetic against loneliness. We want to know that we're not alone with our loneliness or loss. Memories and loneliness look backward, fear looks around, but faith always looks forward. Lonely, I always thought loneliness meant alone. Without people, it means something else. Physical distance between people has nothing to do with loneliness. It's psychic distance. Some nights are made for torture, or reflection, or the savoring of loneliness. The laughter of the world is merely loneliness pathetically trying to reassure itself. The eternal quest of the individual human being is to shatter his loneliness. Cinema can fill in the empty spaces of your life and your loneliness. I think one of the most poignant things is unrequited love and loneliness. The irony of loneliness is that everybody shares it from time to time. A writer is essentially a man who does not resign himself to loneliness. The abhorrence of loneliness is as natural as wanting to live at all. We're all torn between the desire for privacy and the fear of loneliness. I better be honest about my feelings, even those involving loneliness, jealousy, and fear. But there are other words for privacy and independence. They are isolation and loneliness. I've decided that the worst part of loneliness isn't being alone, it's being forgotten. She was consumed by 3 simple things: drink, despair, loneliness, and 2 more, youth and beauty. To the resentment that hides inside love, to the loneliness that hides among companions. Being alone was easier, no risk, just loneliness. No one ever died from that. Friendship needs no words. It is solitude delivered from the anguish of loneliness. The loneliness of another can be shocking when it lays itself bare, without warning. You build walls to fortify your heart and blame on others for your loneliness. Moon, moon, I am prone before you. Pity me and drench me in loneliness. I suppose doing things you hate is the price you pay to avoid loneliness. I, however, cannot force myself to use meat drugs to cheat on my loneliness. We are born helpless. As soon as we are fully conscious, we discover loneliness. When traversing the vast sea of loneliness, oneness is the only true safe harbor. When loneliness comes stalking, go into the fields. Consider the orderliness of the world. Poverty is clearly one source of emotional suffering, but there are others, like loneliness. Half drunk on well-creamed gas station coffee and the exhilarating loneliness of a freeway in nighttime. My loneliness was born when men praised my talkative faults and blamed my silent virtues. She was overstrained with grief and loneliness. Almost any shoulder would have done as well. Remember that although the distinction can be difficult to draw, loneliness and solitude are different. When everyone leaves you, it's loneliness you feel. When you leave everyone else, it's solitude. The loneliness you feel with another person, the wrong person, is the loneliest of all. Fiction is one of the few experiences where loneliness can be both confronted and relieved. He liked the loneliness of inner space, the sense of being forgotten by the world. You can overcome sadness, loneliness, even terrible loss, but guilt goes with you the grave. People cannot win against their loneliness because loneliness is this world's worst kind of pain. I think she ate a salad and some soup, and loneliness, she ate that too. We can never leave loneliness behind completely. It is part of what forms us. Walking by yourself in the rain is for college kids who think loneliness makes poets. The dread of loneliness is greater than the fear of bondage, so we get married. Forget sex or politics or religion. Loneliness is the subject that clears out a room. Celebrate your humanness, celebrate your craziness, celebrate your inadequacies, celebrate your loneliness, but celebrate you. Fame always brings loneliness. Success is as ice cold and lonely as the North Pole. My loneliness turned itself inside out, and I grew myself a kind of perverse pride. Even to loneliness there is an end, for those who are lonely enough, long enough. The worst thing about loneliness is that it brings one face to face with oneself. One form of loneliness is to have a memory and no one to share it with. Everything is freedom and everything is loneliness. Make your choice and let the rest fall away. Real loneliness is having no one to miss. Think yourself lucky you've known something worth missing. He understood far more deeply than anyone else the loneliness that lurked beneath his jaunty mask. Loneliness is a twilight moment by feelings, longing after something or someone you cannot reach. Our selfishness will condemn us to the worst suffering that we ourselves have invented, loneliness. I barely noticed loneliness anymore. It was my normal condition, by necessity if not by nature. Mandarin ducks mate for life and will die of loneliness if separated from their chosen mate. The loneliness of writing is that you baffle your friends and change the lives of strangers. Sometimes, the loneliness probably got to be too much, and anyone seemed better than no one. Poverty and loneliness could be seen as a liberation from strivings to become rich and popular. Fortunately for women, most men mistake loneliness for love before marriage and habit for happiness afterward. When humans find themselves surrounded by nothing but objects, the response is always one of loneliness. People are longing to rediscover true community. We have had enough of loneliness, independence, and competition. It is loneliness that makes the loudest noise. This is true of men as of dogs. What wants to live in you may be waiting ... at the end of a long loneliness. It seems to be that loneliness is a small price to pay for peace and quiet. In loneliness, the lonely one eats himself. In a crowd, the many eat him. Now choose. We have all known the long loneliness, and we have found that the answer is community. The real loneliness is living among all these kind people who only ask one to pretend. She stays in the same spot, anchored by the profound, desperate loneliness of a bad relationship. Life is loneliness, broken only by the gods taunting us with friendship and the odd bonk. Solitude is different from loneliness, and it doesn't have to be a lonely kind of thing. Smell remembers and tells the future. Smell is home or loneliness, confidence or betrayal. Smell remembers. Freedom is the most expensive possession there is. It has to be paid for with loneliness. Fly fishing is a magic way to recapture the rapture of solitude without the pangs of loneliness. The traits of our sexual culture are still speechlessness, loneliness, violence, and not enough desire and love. And my loneliness, always my loneliness, that airless bubble of despair that is slowing, stifling me. There is a strain of loneliness infecting many Christians, which only the presence of God can cure. Shyness is a condition foreign to the heart, a category, a dimension which leads to loneliness. Fiction, poetry, music, these are the places where loneliness is countenanced, stared down, transfigured, treated. The pain of the constant, bone-chilling loneliness she'd accustomed herself to and learned to live with it. Vanity, revenge, loneliness, boredom, all apply. Lust is one of the least of the reasons for promiscuity. There is no loneliness like the loneliness of crowds, especially to those who are unaccustomed to them. Ursula craved solitude, but she hated loneliness, a conundrum that she could not even begin to solve. The whole world of loneliness, poverty, and pain make a mockery of what human life should be. Some feelings sink so deep into the heart that only loneliness can help you find them again. The only answer in this life to the loneliness we are all bound to feel is community. No one complains of being a prisoner of love who has ever been a prisoner of loneliness. I'm supposed to be. I am an artist. Yes, I'm lonely, but I'm married to my loneliness. When the fire of love is quenched, hatred creeps in through the window of neglect and loneliness. I live with the people I create, and it has always made my essential loneliness less keen. At the simplicity of the gesture, he felt a pang, the raw nerve of his loneliness exposed. Every time I stepped into madness of the crowds, I longed for the wisdom of the loneliness. Once in a while, people enter our lives and lessen the loneliness of being away from home. Where a people prays, there is the church, and where the church is, there is never loneliness. am stronger than depression and I am braver than loneliness, and nothing will ever exhaust me. I'll never forget how the depression and loneliness felt good and bad at the same time, still does. I think I'd like to be able to heal people's pain, whether it is hunger, loneliness, or whatever. For too many women, pregnancy is just the start of loneliness and abuse. It is a cruel reality. In human relations, one should penetrate to the core of loneliness in each person and speak to that. Do we have any food that wasn't brutally slaughtered? Homer, well, I think the veal died of loneliness. Ideas aren't real estate, they grow collectively, and that knocks out the egotistical loneliness that generally infects art. Marriage, don't be pressured into it. Is the fear of loneliness really greater than the fear of bondage? How tired God must be of guilt and loneliness, for that is all we ever bring to Him. This world that I live in is empty and cold. The loneliness cuts me and tortures my soul. One of the things reading does, it makes your loneliness manageable if you are an essentially lonely person. Don't let loneliness drive you back into the arms of someone who doesn't give a damn about you. We are awakening from the dream of isolation, from the dream of loneliness, and it's a terrible shock. I've been in that angst of loneliness where you're really alone in the universe, except for the dog. You write a story about loneliness and you grab them all because everybody's an expert on that one. The vast loneliness is awe-inspiring, and it makes you realize just what you have back there on Earth. You got your glory and you paid for it all. You take your pension in loneliness and alcohol. An artist is always alone if he is an artist. No, what the artist needs is loneliness. Don't be afraid of loneliness, because everything is a door. Even loneliness is a door. It opens to somewhere. Sometimes the lies you tell are less frightening than the loneliness you might feel if you stop telling them. There's a difference between solitude and loneliness. I can understand the concept of being a monk for a while. I kept waiting for that loneliness and nervousness to make me want to go back, but it never did. Maybe the biggest problem with loneliness is that we walk around thinking we're the only ones suffering from it. The principal contributor to loneliness in this country is television. What happens is that the family gets together alone. The season's difference is a suave and urbane comedy about several immense abstractions: faith, innocence, loneliness, and love. What you notice is the loneliness. Daniel started to isolate himself because it hurt less than being pushed away. Anger is a manifestation of a deeper issue, and that, for me, is based on insecurity, self-esteem, and loneliness. Touch is one of the most ancient transactions, a defiance of the plasma membrane and the loneliness it brought. We have to live with our loneliness and the destiny that drives each person to the order of things. The deepest need of the human being is to overcome our separateness, to leave the prison of our loneliness. While we yearn for peace, we live in a world burdened with hunger, pain, anguish, loneliness, sickness, and sorrow. If we don't have each other, we go crazy with loneliness. When we do, we go crazy with togetherness. Works of art are of an infinite loneliness, and with nothing so little to be reached as with criticism. At the innermost core of all loneliness is a deep and powerful yearning for union with one's lost self. For loneliness, worries, difficulties, the unsatisfied need for kindness and sympathy, that is what is hard to bear. I felt the death loneliness that comes at the end of every day that is wasted in your life. Green makes me think of silence, or maybe it's loneliness. I get the feeling of a terribly distant star. We are not alone in our loneliness. Others have been here and known griefs we thought our special own. Sorrow is not in death but in loneliness, and conflict comes when you seek consolation, forgetfulness, explanations, and illusions. And because of our selfishness, we will be condemned to the worst torture humankind ever invented for itself, loneliness. A season of loneliness and isolation is when the caterpillar gets its wings. Remember that next time you feel alone. Companionship is a foreign concept to some people. They fear it as much as the majority of people fear loneliness. The sentiment of immediate loss in some sort decayed, while that of utter, irremediable loneliness grew on me with time. Every human being in that case resembles Christ in his loneliness, and that is the hardest part. That's real hunger. You will never feel alone if you run down the stairs of loneliness, as every solitary step becomes your companion. The very fine line between loneliness and solitude, reflection, being alone, always appealed to me when I was a kid. There is no loneliness greater than the loneliness of a failure. The failure is a stranger in his own house. I understood that in this small space of time we had mutually surrendered our loneliness and replaced it with trust. Love all the people you can. The sufferings from love are not to be compared to the sorrows of loneliness. It is better to be alone than to become a person that loses his soul to the fear of loneliness. The problem with the loneliness I suffer is that the company of others has never been a cure for it. Times may have changed, but there are some things that are always with us. Loneliness is one of them. We are called to love even in the loneliness, worship even in the tears, and follow even in the darkness. What is man without the beasts? If all the beasts were gone, men would die from great loneliness of spirit. The sky is one whole, the water another, and between those two infinities the soul of man is in loneliness. No specter assails us in more varied disguises than loneliness, and one of its most impenetrable masks is called love. When you jump onto the emptiness of the loneliness, the best parachute to land you safely will be the books. I would argue that it might be easier to endure loneliness than to endure the idea that you might disappear. I could tell you it's the heart, but what is really killing him is loneliness. Memories are worse than bullets. Hostility comes from loneliness, from not seeing yourself like a drop falling into the ocean of humanity like everyone else. You can use your time to build bridges or walls. The latter is not only un-Christ-like, it limits impact and creates loneliness. You are my hope during my days of loneliness, my anxiety during moments of doubt, my certainty during moments of faith. I know the dark delight of being strange, the penalty of difference in the crowd, the loneliness of wisdom among fools. I had traded the fight against love for the fight against loneliness, the fight against life for the fight against death. Many times I wondered whether my achievement was worth the loneliness I experienced, but now I realize the price was small. The whole problem of life, then, is this: how to break out of one's own loneliness, how to communicate with others. She was unequal to anyone's wistfulness. She had made too little of her life. Its loneliness shamed her like a crime. One can experience loneliness in two ways: by feeling lonely in the world or by feeling the loneliness of the world. The worst part of holding the memories is not the pain, it's the loneliness of it. Memories need to be shared. When it comes to pain, love, joy, loneliness, and fear, a rat is a pig, is a dog, is a boy. I've noticed that loneliness gets stronger when we try to face it down, but gets weaker when we simply ignore it. I shall lead you through the loneliness, the solitude you will not understand, but it is my shortcut to your soul. One's need for loneliness is not satisfied if one sits at a table alone. There must be empty chairs as well. Please, God, help me. Take this pain away. Please fill this loneliness with your love. Help me, God, please help me. The fact that Saggio composed a poem that begins, "I shall be unhappy without loneliness," shows that he made loneliness his master. The best of community does give one a deep sense of belonging and well-being, and in that sense community takes away loneliness. The song is languid and speaks of love and loneliness and loss. Why does love seem to go with the sad things? It was very relaxing to be away from civilization, and this bothered me. I should not have found the loneliness so welcoming. The gift of loneliness is sometimes a radical vision of society, or one's people that has not previously been taken into account. Locked into loneliness were we two, and looking at one another every evening we each saw the one we blamed for it. Man has no choice but to love, for when he does not, he finds his alternatives lie in loneliness, destruction, and despair. There are people who cannot risk loneliness with the experience. They always have to be in a flock and have human contact. If you go deeper and deeper into your own heart, you'll be living in a world with less fear, isolation, and loneliness. A book full of human touches, of shirts, a book without loneliness, with men and tools, a book is victory. What do you care? You always liked loneliness better than you liked people. No offense, liking yourself's the beginning of all love. Being single isn't the cause of loneliness, and marriage is not necessarily the cure. There are many lonely married people as well. Whenever I'm around people, it causes me to feel nostalgic for the loneliness that drove me into their presence in the first place. The loneliness you get by the sea is personal and alive. It doesn't subdue you and make you feel abject. It's stimulating loneliness. Instead of hiding your loneliness, bring it into the light, honor it, treat it, heal it. You'll find that it returns the favor. Like all strong people, she suffered always a measure of loneliness. She was a marginal outsider, a secret infidel of a certain sort. I inhale loneliness like it is the sweet smell of virgin earth conquered by fiery raindrops. Within me, I'm 1,000 others. We're afraid that this anger or sorrow or loneliness is going to last forever. Instead, acting it out is what makes it last. But when I thought I hit bottom, it started hitting back. There is no bruise like the bruise loneliness kicks into your spine. Aloneness is a state of being, whereas loneliness is a state of feeling. It's like the difference between being broke and being poor. Being stigmatized by sex is being marked by its meaning in a human life of loneliness and imperfection, where some pain is indelible. We don't have a word for the opposite of loneliness, but if we did, I could say that's what I want in life. If you are not capable of being alone, your relationship is false. It is just a trick to avoid your loneliness, nothing else. For many people, loneliness was an experience of time. Not knowing what to do with yourself was the way it was usually put. You do not have to be alone. The world never inflicts loneliness upon us. That is something we choose or reject by ourselves. People drain me, even the closest of friends, and I find loneliness to be the best state in the union to live in. I don't know of a great artist who did not sacrifice and thereby have to wrestle with the depths of loneliness and sadness. No matter how lonely it makes me, and no matter how wide and horrific the loneliness, at least I remember who I am. She did not know the nature of her loneliness. The only words that named it were, "This is not the world I expected." We have all known the long loneliness, and we have learned that the only solution is love, and that love comes with community. What is man without the beasts? For if all the beasts were gone, man would die of a great loneliness of the spirit. Learn your way around loneliness. Make a map of it. Sit with it for once in your life. Welcome to the human experience. The feelings we live through in love and in loneliness are simply, for us, what high tide and low tide are to the sea. Any business or enterprise that shaves away loneliness is going to last forever, and like it or not, but we've got a lonely society. I realized that I knew less about loneliness than I had thought, and much less than I would know when he went away. What was the point in such loneliness among people? At least if you were by yourself, you had a good reason to be lonely. There is a crisis that is not political, an epidemic of loneliness, of sadness, and we're completely unequal to dealing with it. There were times when I had great times with my brothers, pillow fights and things, but I was used to always cry from loneliness. We are so lonely in life that we must ask ourselves if the loneliness of dying is not a symbol of our human existence. But the more people we love and the more deeply we love them, the more vulnerable we are to loss and grief and loneliness. There is a loneliness in this world so great that you can see it in the slow movement of the hands of a clock. It would be really wonderful if people connected to the loneliness of what it means to be a human being in the world today. You are alone, so alone, you speak back to silence. People call it loneliness, you call it solitude. Different words, meaning the same pain. Some nights in the midst of this loneliness I swung among the scattered stars at the end of the thin thread of faith alone. I felt as hot tears and the loneliness of man and the sweetness of all men and the aching haunting beauty of the living. And not out of fear or loneliness, but only to find myself again, for we have come too far, my life, to turn back now. I am learning to see loneliness as a seed that, when planted deep enough, can grow into writing that goes back out into the world. So it is that lonely places attract as many lonely people as they produce, and the loneliness we see in them is partly in ourselves. I did not love you out of boredom or loneliness or caprice. I loved you because the desire for you was stronger than any happiness. Maybe true love isn't out there for me, but I can sublimate my loneliness with the notion that true love is out there for someone. Sorrow has a name, and its name is loneliness. Sorrow has a shape, and its shape is absence. Sorrow is a sickness like any other. He is one of those who has had the wilderness for a pillow, and called a star his brother. Alone, but loneliness can be a communion. I felt the kind of loneliness that can happen in a room full of people when everyone but you seems to be in on the good time. Why were we so far apart, even when we were together? It was a nice loneliness, like the sensation of washing your face in cold water. You ache with loneliness one night so much you weep, and I say here is a rope, tie it around me, half is will be your companion for life. Who can really distinguish between the sea and what's reflected in it, or tell the difference between the falling rain and loneliness? There in the center of that silence was not eternity, but the death of time, and a loneliness so profound the word itself had no meaning. Don't think you can frighten me by telling me that I am alone. France is alone, God is alone, and the loneliness of God is his strength. Writing is a solitary occupation, and one of its hazards is loneliness. But an advantage of loneliness is privacy, autonomy, and freedom. Lost in loneliness and pain, black and unendurable, thinking of you with every corpuscle of my flesh, in every instant of night and day. We give it up and just look directly with compassion and humor at who we are. Then loneliness is no threat and heartache, no punishment. Nothing impresses the mind with a deeper feeling of loneliness than to tread the silent and deserted scene of former throng and pageant. The definition of the word nerd has changed. It's now any attractive person with a hobby. The loneliness component is no longer included. Loneliness has its roots in words, in internal conversation that not body answers. Solitude has its roots in the great silence of eternity. Summer nights held a special kind of loneliness that gave rise to strange imaginings. One walked the beach alone and thought too much. We use TV as we use tranquilizers to even things out, to blot out unpleasantness, to dilute confusion, distress, unhappiness, loneliness. Like falling stars from the universe, we are hurled down through the long loneliness of the world until we behold the pain, become the pearl. At first it upset me to realize how many people are, at heart, selfish. Now I take that in stride, but people's loneliness still gets to me. She was like a lone angel floating above the surface of the earth, laughing with delight because she could fly, but crying out of loneliness. Action is limited and relative. Unlimited and absolute is the vision of him who sits at ease and watches, who walks in loneliness and dreams. Offering sex for money is not a profession that glorifies women. It is a profession born of desperation, poverty, aliadioin, and loneliness. Real love is not an escape from loneliness. Real love is an overflowing aloneness. One is so happy in being alone that one would like to share. It is hard going to the door cut so small in the wall, where the vision which echoes loneliness brings a scent of wild flowers in the wood. Even in this world where you're getting everything you need and having this nice life, there's still loneliness and longing and disconnection. I think we often write because we feel a loneliness, and people read for the same reason, and then they come away feeling a little less lonely. I'm one of the millions of immigrant children of loneliness, wandering between worlds that are at once too old and too new to live in. Isolation and loneliness create the conditions for rapid aging. The key is to stay connected and open to new relationships throughout your life. I have learned to be steady in my course of love or fear or loneliness rather than impulsive in its wasting, either lyrically or emotionally. The best antidote for loneliness, hopelessness, and fear is vulnerability, sharing your secrets and talking about what shames you, what you fear. The sadness, the silence, the darkness, the loneliness, all of it held in a simple little moment. It was just so, I don't know, just so much. Oh, death will find me long before I tire of watching for you, and swing me suddenly into the shade and loneliness and mire of the last land. The general public is a statistical fiction created by a few exceptional men to make the loneliness of being exceptional a little easier to bear. Shouldering your loneliness like a gun that you will not learn to aim, you stumble into this movie house, then you climb into the frame. I thought I knew what loneliness was before he found me, but I had no clue. You don't know what real loneliness is until you've known the opposite. Good manners, the longer I live, the more convinced I am of it, are a priceless insurance against failure and loneliness, and anyone can have them. Some of us are afraid of dying, others of human loneliness. Profane was afraid of land or seascapes like this, where nothing else lived but himself. I need noise and interruptions and irritation. Irritation and discomfort are a great starter. The loneliness of doing it any other way would kill me. There have been times in my life when I have felt I was lonely, but I don't think you want to live your life in order to mitigate against loneliness. Here had lived someone else who knew that the only thing waiting at home was a sense of loneliness. Sometimes it is comforting, most often it isn't. For was that all, she thought bleakly, that love ever was? Something that saved one from loneliness, a sort of insurance policy against not counting. Greedy a quarter has no satiation point, since its consummation does not fill the inner emptiness, boredom, loneliness, and depression it is meant to overcome. There might be some hours of loneliness, but there was something wonderful even in loneliness. At least you belonged to yourself when you were lonely. On certain continents, poverty is more spiritual than material, a poverty that consists of loneliness, discouragement, and the lack of meaning in life. Solitude without togetherness deteriorates into loneliness. One needs strong roots in togetherness to be solitary rather than lonely when one is alone. Loneliness is a feeling that is created by our ego. The ego feels separate from the rest of creation. The answer to overcoming those feelings is ecstasy. Believe to the end, even if all men went astray and you were left the only one faithful, bring your offering even then, and praise God in your loneliness. I am interested in the loneliness and isolation that we can feel when we hide feelings we are ashamed of, especially if they concern people that we love. But visiting see, your love doth press, and reach in further than you know, divided by and fills all these, and, when you go, divided by there's loneliness in loneliness. The loneliness of the man is slowly being borne in upon me. There is not a man aboard but hates or fears him, nor is there a man whom he does not despise. It is said that life is too short, and that's quite true. Unless you are lonely, loneliness can bring time to its knees, an absolute and utter standstill. For the way loneliness is worse when you return to it after a reprieve like the Sola's version of putting on a wet bathing suit, clammy and miserable. A disquieting loneliness came into my life, but it induced no hunger for friends of longer acquaintance. They seemed now like a salt-free, sugarless diet. He would say her name over and over until it devolved into meaningless sounds. Ma-R-E-I-Ka, Ma-R-E-I-Ka. It became an entry in a dictionary of loneliness. We're always alone. You can be in a crowded room and still feel the bite of loneliness. Personally, I find that it bites deepest whenever others are around. I was born on a tiny cot in southwestern Massachusetts during World War II. A sickly child, I turned to photography to overcome my loneliness and isolation. She had always maintained a cynical facade, using it as a defense against embarrassment, fear, loneliness, but at the moment she felt unusually vulnerable. Fear is the process of the mind in the struggle of becoming. In becoming good, there is the fear of evil. In becoming complete, there is the fear of loneliness. I sit between my brother the mountain and my sister the sea. We three are one in loneliness, and the love that binds us together is deep and strong and strange. For an instant I think I saw the loneliness of man as a gigantic wave which had been frozen in front of me, held back by the invisible wall of a metaphor. Sometimes you can be lucky enough to establish a working relationship with another artist who takes away the loneliness, particularly in travel and outdoor work. And if I'm alone in bed, I will go to the window, look up at the sky, and feel certain that loneliness is a lie, because the universe is there to keep me company. Loneliness, dejection, the contempt or pity of people around you, these are unpleasant feelings, but they are precisely the things that produce genuine dark ones. Real loneliness consists not in being alone, but in being with the wrong person, in the suffocating darkness of a room in which no deep communication is possible. Everybody has something that chews them up, and, for me, that thing was always loneliness. The cinema has the power to make you not feel lonely, even when you are. The desolation and terror of, for the first time, realizing that the mother can lose you, or you her, and your own abysmal loneliness and helplessness without her. At some point, just about all of us experience loneliness. In a sense, it is what it means to be a sentient animal, to have an experience of separation from others. On the outside, one is a star, but in reality, one is completely alone, doubting everything. To experience this loneliness of soul is the hardest thing in the world. My plight has given me a strange kind of wealth, the most important kind. I value each moment that is not spent in pain, desperation, hunger, thirst, or loneliness. We all fear loneliness, madness, dying. Shakespeare and Walt Whitman, Leopardi and Hart Crane will not cure those fears, and yet these poets bring us fire and light. How dear to the mind of the sage are the thoughts that are bred in loneliness, for there is as it were music at his heart, and he talketh within him as with friends. See, the thing is, as a writer you are free. You are about the freest person that ever was. Your freedom is what you have bought with your solitude, your loneliness. Leadership is the other side of the coin of loneliness, and he who is a leader must always act alone, and acting alone, accept everything alone. Loneliness expresses the pain of being alone, and solitude expresses the glory of being alone. Anger is a manifestation of a deeper issue, and that, for me, is based on insecurity, self-esteem, and loneliness. I don't know of a great artist who did not sacrifice and thereby have to wrestle with the depths of loneliness and sadness. Solitude is pleasant, loneliness is not. Unless we love and are loved, each of us is alone. Each of us is deeply lonely. A lot of my life has been lonely, fantastic, but lonely. What loneliness is more lonely than distrust? Loneliness adds beauty to life. It puts a special burn on sunsets and makes night air smell better. Online communities are an expression of loneliness. I've never thought about songwriting as a weapon. I've only thought about it as a way to help me get through love and loss and sadness and loneliness and growing up. I had never felt so lonely and so sad in my entire life. I have a life that's just been a well of loneliness. We use TV as we use tranquilizers to even things out, to blot out unpleasantness, to dilute confusion, distress, unhappiness, loneliness. 30. The promise of a decade of loneliness, a thinning list of single men to know, a thinning briefcase of enthusiasm, thinning hair. She learned the intricacy of loneliness, the horror of color, the roar of soundlessness, and the menace of familiar objects lying still. Loneliness has its roots in words, in internal conversation that not body answers. Solitude has its roots in the great silence of eternity. Writing is a solitary occupation, and one of its hazards is loneliness. But an advantage of loneliness is privacy, autonomy, and freedom. Who can really distinguish between the sea and what's reflected in it, or tell the difference between the falling rain and loneliness? Nothing impresses the mind with a deeper feeling of loneliness than to tread the silent and deserted scene of former throng and pageant. Summer nights held a special kind of loneliness that gave rise to strange imaginings. One walked the beach alone and thought too much. The definition of the word nerd has changed. It's now any attractive person with a hobby. The loneliness component is no longer included. The directing of a picture involves coming out of your individual loneliness and taking a controlling part in putting together a small world. Hope rises and dreams flicker and die. Love plans for tomorrow and loneliness thinks of yesterday. Life is beautiful and living is pain. Lost in loneliness and pain, black and unendurable, thinking of you with every corpuscle of my flesh, in every instant of night and day. We give it up and just look directly with compassion and humor at who we are. Then loneliness is no threat and heartache, no punishment. Travel is in sad case. It is uncomfortable, it is expensive, it is a source of annoyance to our friends and of loneliness to ourselves. I can give you my loneliness, my darkness, the hunger of my heart. I am trying to bribe you with uncertainty, with danger, with defeat. Like falling stars from the universe, we are hurled down through the long loneliness of the world until we behold the pain, become the pearl. The loneliness of the expatriate is of an odd and complicated kind, for it is inseparable from the feeling of being free, of having escaped. She was like a lone angel floating above the surface of the earth, laughing with delight because she could fly, but crying out of loneliness. Action is limited and relative. Unlimited and absolute is the vision of him who sits at ease and watches, who walks in loneliness and dreams. There in the center of that silence was not eternity, but the death of time, and a loneliness so profound the word itself had no meaning. If there is a look of human eyes that tells of perpetual loneliness, so there is also the familiar look that is the sign of perpetual crowds. Don't think you can frighten me by telling me that I am alone. France is alone, God is alone, and the loneliness of God is his strength. At first it upset me to realize how many people are, at heart, selfish. Now I take that in stride, but people's loneliness still gets to me. I will never say the things that I want to say to you. I know the damage it would do. I love you more than I hate my loneliness. And pain. Lone women like to empty houses, perish. We're going to make that lone star shine again. Lone women shouldn't stop in the middle of nowhere for giant unkempt strangers with duct tape on their faces. My father is black and my mother is white. Therefore, I could answer to either, which kind of makes me a racial lone ranger, caught between two communities. And starward drifts the stricken world, lone in unalterable gloom dead, with a universe for tomb, dark, and to vaster darkness world, the testimony of the suns. Like a missing tooth, sometimes an absence is more noticeable than a presence. But I was the most unashamed lone parent you were ever going to meet. Spy novels are traditionally about lone wolves, but how many people actually live like that? When the snows fall and the white winds blow, the lone wolf dies but the pack survives. To be a lone filmmaker thousands of miles from home with nobody believing in me, that seems romantic. There was a point where I really felt I had penniless divorcee lone parent tattooed on my head. The wolves knew when it was time to stop looking for what they'd lost, to focus instead on what was yet to come. Never be afraid to try something new. Remember that a lone amateur built the Ark. A large group of professionals built the Titanic. I cannot keep quiet even when I am a lone voice. Always someone resting there, a lone rock in the summer field. On a lone winter evening, when the frost has wrought a silence. It was the first follower that transformed the lone nut into a leader. Wolves don't hunt singly, but always in pairs. The lone wolf was a myth. A lone hello, standing in the door, waving goodbye. This is how I picture love. Kill the idea of the lone, suffering artist. Don't make it any harder on yourself. Life is a lone wolf, scratching out a living with teeth and claws and a heart of stone. The role that I play as a lone striker, I enjoy it, and particularly playing with great players. Winter crescent resting in the high pine bough, you fly through the woods like a lone snowbird. It was a lone voice in the middle of the ocean, but it was heard at great depth and great distance. An actress wants to be seen. An actress wants to be loved by multitudes of people, not just one lone man. Never was isle so little, never was sea so lone, but over the scud and the palm trees an English flag was flown. There is no thrill of mortal danger to surpass that of a lone man trying to create something that never existed before. While obsessive behavior may be an antisocial plague to societies and communities at large, it's total moxie when lone practitioners catch it. A lone walker is both present and detached, more than an audience but less than a participant. Walking assuages or legitimizes this alienation. We are very definitely in a new phase in the global terrorist threat, where the so-called lone wolf could strike at any moment. He stood beside a cottage lone and listened to a lute one summer's eve when the breeze was gone and the nightingale was mute. Anarchism's lone objective is to reach a point at which the belligerence of some humans against humanity, in whatever form, comes to a halt. The virtuous soul that is alone and without a master is like a long, lone burning coal. It will grow colder rather than hotter. Do you think I want to be the one lone voice against the Hollywood liberal establishment? It's not going to do me any good. I think we're going to have to take a hard look about what more we can do to prevent this kind of lone wolf attack. That's not the federal law. What you're confusing is law with the opinion of a justice. What one lone federal judge says is not law. A vampire victim. I'd never seen a lone kill. They were like potato chips. Once a vamp tasted them, he couldn't stop at just one. She was like a lone angel floating above the surface of the earth, laughing with delight because she could fly, but crying out of loneliness. The first follower is actually an underestimated form of leadership in itself. The first follower is what transforms a lone nut into a leader. Unlike those who fight truly intolerant things like terrorism throughout the world, Madonna is really the lone brave voice in the wilderness standing up against evil. I am truly a lone traveler and have never belonged to my country, my home, my friends, or even my immediate family, with my whole heart. When we think of his lone effort to live and its bleak reward, the mind turns to the myth for his mercy endureth forever, with confiding revulsion. At the heart of its strength is a weakness. A lone candle can hold it back. Love is more than a candle. Love can ignite the stars. For there is surely nothing more beautiful in this world than the sight of a lone man facing single-handedly a half a ton of angry pot roast. Strong creatures don't form herds. Have they never heard of a lone wolf? Cats are cute and wolves are cool. So in essence, loners are cute and cool. How could I fail to be a lone wolf and an uncouth hermit, as I did not share one of its aims nor understand one of its pleasures? I know we will look back on this and think how odd it was we were championing the rights of lone mothers to bring up their children on benefit. I have a number of proposals how to tackle this issue of self-radicalization. I would set up a team exclusively dedicated to detecting and preventing lone wolf attacks. He was swept with a sadness deep and penetrating, leaving him desolate like someone washed up on a beach, a lone survivor in a world full of strangers. Although our love is waning, let us stand by the lone border of the lake once more, together in that hour of gentleness, when the poor tired child, passion, falls asleep. A soft and sheltered Christianity, afraid to be lean and lone, unwilling to face the storms and brave the heights, will end up fat and foul in the cages of conformity. As Christians, we're called to belong, not just to believe. We are not meant to live Lone Ranger lives. Instead, we are to belong to Christ's family and be members of his body. Susan, an only child who never had any roots, and I, a lone wolf who got married 20 years too late, were adopted by the kids as much as they were by us. My definition of an intellectual is someone who can listen to the William Tell Overture without thinking of the Lone Ranger. Which quote did you like the most? Share your opinion in the comments. Don't miss out on a chance to see the next video. Subscribe.